So, the English Reformation, and actually, yes, no, I think we should be all right. It's basically about the division between Catholics and Protestants, about how somehow or other we went from a religion which was, in Europe at least, they were just Catholics. Now, outside Europe, there were Russian, Ethiopian, Greek churches. They were not the same as the Catholic Church right from the beginning. So they developed, it's not really that they broke off, it's just that they had developed in different places and they developed separately. Okay? They didn't exactly break off from the Catholic Church, but for Europe, it was the Catholic Church that was kind of, for 1,000 years, it was the only church. It was just one church structure. And then somehow or other, it ended up with Catholics and Protestants separating. Okay? And this separation is called the Reformation. And that's what we're focusing on today. So, starting point here would be, what is a Catholic? What makes a Catholic a Catholic? If you were looking up the board, you'll know the answer, but if you don't know it, if you didn't want to guess or tell me what they think is the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic? It's like the basic. Using the Bible or not, yes, Protestants place more importance on using the Bible, yes. But it's not that Catholics say, well, we don't use the Bible. They use it, but they don't give it quite the same importance that the Protestants do. Right? So it's a difference, but it's not a 100% clear. Okay, anything else? The existence of hierarchy. The hierarchy. And, okay, tell me about that hierarchy. In the Catholic Church, the top person is, say the Japanese if you're not sure. Huh? Yeah, the Pope, okay, the Roma. So that is the basic difference between a Catholic and a Protestant. And we can find other differences, but the basic difference, the one clear 100% difference is that if you follow the Pope, you can be a Catholic. If you don't follow the Pope, you cannot be a Catholic. All right? So there are no Protestants who follow the Pope. So allegiance to the Pope. If you accept the Pope as the head of the church, then that's the Catholic teaching. If you don't accept that, you cannot be Catholic. There are other things that that are different between Catholics and Protestants, but that is the basic one, and that was the situation when Henry VIII said, "Hey, I don't care what the Pope says. I'm going to leave my wife Catherine. I'm going to marry Anne," and then he's not following the Pope. Right? Doesn't matter what he believes about the Bible or anything else, he's not following the Pope. The Pope says, that's no good, you are out. You are not inside my church. Okay? That is the central defining difference between Catholics and Protestants. Okay? Apart from history, you're in a Catholic university, so you should know this stuff. Okay? And a Christian who does not follow the Pope in Europe, I'm not talking about these other churches, Ethiopia or Russia or or Greece or places like that, but with Eastern churches. I'm talking about the main Western European tradition. If you don't follow the Pope, basically you're a Protestant. Okay? But there are lots of other differences between Catholics and Protestants, and I've given you a little, you could write some of these down just to help you to remember them. Yes, we had this idea that Catholics put less importance on the Bible. You see what the Protestants are saying? They're saying sola scriptura. In Latin, it means only the Bible. Se sodaki. But the Catholics had the Bible and church tradition. The way I've shown this here, it shows the Catholic Church kind of following one straight path and then the two separating. But that's not exactly what happened. Let's get a little bit more accurate here and try and show you. But basically what's happening is that the Catholics have been, they start off following the Bible for about 500 years. Okay? And then they start introducing different things that are not in the Bible. Okay? So, they get together, they have these big meetings of the important people in the church, and they say, I know what, let's make a rule that the priests can't get married. Well, there's nothing in the Bible about that. The Bible doesn't say that priests can't get married. They made that decision for themselves at a certain time. Okay? Then somebody says, I've got another good idea, When the people do something bad, they have to go to the priest and they have to say, I'm very sorry I did this terrible thing, forgive me. And the priest will tell them some sort of punishment that they have to do, penalty, because they did something bad. Okay? They may say, you have to pray all night for a week. You're not to sleep, you have to pray all night. They may say you can't eat food for a few days, or they may give you any kind of penalty. All right? Again, there's nothing in the Bible about that. All right? So the Catholic Church had been moving away from the Bible for a long time. What the Protestants wanted to say was, we want to go back. We want to go back to the church before it started to move away from the Bible. So they made this idea, we're just based on the Bible. It's not as simple as that, but for now, okay, we'll say it like that. Now, this idea of justification. Justification means you die, you want to go to heaven, and hello? Excuse me, I'm dead. You've got to come in. Why should I let you in? I was a very good boy. Always went to church on Sunday. And when I saw poor people, I gave them a little bit of money. I've always been a very good boy, and I did what my mummy told me. And the Protestants would say, that's not good enough. All right? The Catholics might say, oh, well, in that case, you have to come to heaven. The Protestants would say, that's not good enough. And you stand there saying, did you believe in Jesus Christ? Did you believe that Jesus Christ would let you come to heaven? So, I never really thought about it. Well, you could go to hell. Okay? They had to trust all through their life that Jesus, or some maybe they didn't begin trusting, maybe they changed in their life, but they had to believe while they were alive, they had to trust that Jesus Christ would allow them to go to heaven. That's faith. Okay? They trust. They trust that God will let them go to heaven. Not because they do good things, but because they trusted in God. All right? Now, today, if you ask a Catholic, they'll say, oh, you need both of those. And today, if you ask a Protestant, most Protestants would say, well, no, I mean, if you were a really bad person and you just went through your life saying, I can kill anybody I want, I can rob anybody I want, I can do anything I want because I know that Jesus Christ is going to let me go to heaven, I don't think that's going to work. Okay? So today, Catholics and Protestants are not so separate on this issue. But in those days, they were very separate. The Catholics were saying, you get to heaven by doing good things. And the Protestants were saying, it doesn't matter if you do good things in your heart, if you don't truly believe that Jesus Christ will save you, you're going to go to heaven. Okay? So, they made a big difference between us. It is strange because the Bible says both things. Okay, but the Protestants chose one side of it, and the Catholics chose another side at that time. Also is the idea that it's your choice. The Catholics would say, it's your choice, you have this life, you do what you make, whatever you do in this life, that's going to decide whether you go to heaven or hell, and it's up to you. Nobody can make you go to heaven or make you go to hell, it's up to you. Whereas the Protestants said, no, in the Bible, God has a book of life. And it's like a telephone directory. Your name's in it or your name's not. Okay? If your name's not in it, you're not going to go to heaven. And Jesus, God, made that book of life right at the beginning. Before any of us were born, before the world was made, right at the beginning, God made this book of life. Again, you have to trust. You have to say, yeah, but God wouldn't leave my name out. God, my name must be in. I believe that God put my name in that book right at the beginning. Okay, that's connected with the one before. You have to trust that God would have done that. God wouldn't be so nasty as not to do that. Okay? So, it's decided before you were ever born whether you're going to go to heaven or hell. If your name's in the book of life, you're going to go to heaven. If it's not, you're going to go to hell. That's how the Protestants saw it. You don't really have a choice in this life. It's already been decided. You just have to trust that it's been decided in your favor. Heaven and hell only, well, most people aren't, even bad people aren't really bad. Very often they just weak, foolish. And even good people have their bad days. He was a good person, but when the soldiers came, he just wasn't brave enough. People, yeah, but he was a good person. Do we want to think that he's in hell or in heaven? So the Catholics made a different place in between. Purgatory, where when you die, you would be cleaned of your weakness in life, and in the end, you would go to heaven. So purgatory was similar to hell. You would suffer, but it would end. And when the suffering ended, you would be able to go to heaven. Well, this was, right? It's just a story they made up, if you like, because it's not in the Bible. Right? They just felt, it's so severe. You either go to heaven or hell. There's nothing else. All right? They felt that was too strict. So they got this idea of purgatory. And then another important one was, like I said, when you go to the priest and you say, I did something bad, the priest will say, well, you have a kind of punishment because you did a bad thing. And then God will forgive you. And that's called penance. You do penance. It might be like you have to go to a famous place that's very kind of holy, you have to go there. You have to walk there. You have to walk the last part on your knees. Okay? Right? You have to walk like this to get there. Okay? And you have to do this. You have to do this act of suffering. You have to make yourself suffer. And then you will be clean again. Protestants said, no, 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 no. You have to feel sorry in your heart. That's all you have to do. But you have to do it. You see, the person who says, well, I'm really sorry, he goes to the Shinpo-sama and he says, so what's your story? He said, well, I slept with another woman. And the Shinpo-sama said, again? Yes, again. Oh, well, it's the usual. You have to do this, and you have to do this. You have to take a whip, and you have to hit yourself on the back 10 times, and you have to say these prayers, and I'll see you again next month. The guy goes away and whips himself. He says the prayers, and he sleeps with another woman again. He doesn't stop doing it because he doesn't feel sorry in his heart. He just does the penance, but in his heart he doesn't feel sorry. Okay, so the Protestants said, well, that's all wrong. You have to feel sorry in your heart. Okay, and doing these punishments has no meaning. And actually, that's something. This is in the Bible, but it's in the Latin Bible. And the Latin Bible was translated from Greek, and it was translated from Hebrew, it was translated from other languages. And the Protestants here, they're saying, yes, it's in the Latin Bible, but the translator of the Latin Bible made a mistake. If you go to the Greek, if you go to the Hebrew, if you go to the original languages, it says, feel sorry in your heart. It says repentance. It doesn't say penance. This was a mistake made in the 6th century by St. Jerome. When he translated the Bible into Latin, he used the wrong word. Okay, and the whole church has been following the wrong direction because there's a mistake in his Bible. And there are other things like prayers to Mary, prayers to the saints, prayers for the dead. Okay, Protestants would say, no, you can only pray to God. All right, you can't pray to Mary, you can't pray to Maria, you can't pray to the saints or something. You can only pray to God. All right? So those are some of the main differences. And we've got, also prayers for the dead, confession of sins, like I said, going to the priest and saying, he did something bad. Celibacy of the clergy, where the priests cannot marry. Elaborate ritual. Most Protestant churches have a much simpler kind of. They don't have lots of statues and decorations. They don't have lots of different colors. It's very simple. They don't have big ceremonies. Everything's kept as simple as possible. In one of the ceremonies that many Protestant churches have is the ceremony of the priest gives bread and wine to the people. They believe, as Protestants, that it's a symbol. Catholics believe that really is Christ's blood. That really is Christ's flesh. Okay? Henry Hasse was interested in those kinds of questions. So for example, he spent, I think, 3 days talking to a Protestant reformer about the blood and the bread. And is it really bread, or is it a symbol? What is it really? And he listened to the guy, the Protestant reformer, for a long time, and they talked about it for a long time, and then Henry said, thank you. I'm going to stop the conversation there. Take him away and burn him. Take him away and burn him. Seriously. Okay? And that's what happened in those days. And the reformer, the Protestant reformer, would say, okay, that's what God must want for me. And I prefer to burn. I'm not going to change my mind. Because if I change my mind, I believe that I will go to hell. If I prefer to burn and go to heaven. And that's how people thought about it in those days. And that's very difficult for us today to think about. Because even if you went to Jesus Kai and you took those shikusama and you said to them, okay, right, we're actually going to burn you. Okay? If you don't agree that whether the blood, in their case, we have to say, we're going to burn you if you won't agree that it's only symbolic, that it's just wine and it's a symbol of Christ's blood. Do you think that they would die for it? Do you think that in our world today, people could die for something like that? I doubt it. I doubt if even the Catholic priests, here at Sophia, I think they would say, this is the 21st century, we just don't do that, okay? But that's the way that people understood things, 400 or 500 years ago, and that's the period that we're studying. We have to understand that religion was incredibly important to these people, all right? So that's why I'm talking about it quite a lot, all right? So, okay, those are some of the other things that would be differences between Catholics and Protestants. Okay, let's move on a little bit. One thing to notice is that you've just got this one Catholic church. It's got the Pope at the head of it. That's the Catholic Church, all right, with the Pope at the top. And it's just one church. In fact, the word Catholic means universal. All right? Today, again, things are not quite so simple. The Catholic Church here in Japan does things that the Catholic Church in Italy wouldn't do. Right? Well, it's Japan. You have to compromise a bit. Okay? I've been to different countries and seen different, Catholic. They are Catholics, but they have ceremonies. When I was in New Caledonia, they have a ceremony for the imo. They don't, because it's a basic food for them. They have a special ceremony, and they do it in the church. Well, they don't have ceremonies for the imo in the Catholic Church in Italy. Okay, it's a kind of let's kind of mix it with the local culture a little bit. So it's not as simple as that, And today you'll see differences in Catholic churches around the world. But basically, it was one structure, it's one organization, and the Pope is at the top of it. Whereas Protestants, if they disagree with the Catholic Church, okay, there are many ways to disagree. Some people can disagree in this direction, other people disagree in this direction. People can disagree in all sorts of different directions. So they're leaving the Catholic Church, but they're not all going in the same direction. Okay? So there are many Protestant churches in the world today. Okay? Back then in the 16th century, you had some famous names, people who are breaking away. We've got one basic Catholic church here, but we've got Baptist churches, Lutheran churches, Evangelical, Anglican, Methodist, Pentecostal, Reformed, and many, many more. Okay, those are just some of them. And Anglican, of course, is the one that we're interested in. That's Eikok Kilkai, the Church of England. It's basically Protestant because it doesn't follow the Pope. So, there are many different Protestant churches because Western Christianity developed many traditions, and the Catholic Church continued and accepted those traditions. So it was one organization. But people breaking away from those traditions and breaking away from the Catholic Church could break away in many different directions. There were many different paths that they could take. Now, one of the difficulties is the Bible itself. Protestants are saying, sola scriptura, only the Bible. But the Bible itself is a confusing document. And I don't think you're going to find a Protestant alive today who follows the Bible exactly. And it's actually probably impossible to follow the Bible exactly. You see, the Bible was written thousands of years ago. So inside the Bible, you'll find, for example, dorei no tsukaikata. Okay? The correct way to treat them, how you should look after slaves, if they do something wrong, how you should punish them, and so on. Does a good Protestant today follow that teaching about how to treat their slaves? I hope not. Okay? That would be pretty strange, wouldn't it? The world has changed. Society has changed. People don't have slaves anymore. But in those days, they did. And the Bible had teaching on how to behave with your slaves, how to treat your slaves. And the Bible, as I say, gives different teachings at different times. It doesn't give a clear, ambiguous message. We'll be seeing more examples of that. So saying the Bible was the main authority, that they're just going to follow the Bible, it doesn't solve the problems that come from different ways of understanding the Bible, and also that the Bible says different things at different times. So there are going to be lots of different ways where everybody's reacting against the Catholic Church, but they're going in different directions in their reactions. So basically, Protestants all disagree with Catholics, but they also disagree about different things and in different ways. They disagree with each other about certain things. And an example would be the teaching in the Bible about marrying your brother's wife. You remember that Henry was sure that God was punishing him by not giving him the son that he wanted. The Bible says that you won't have children if you marry your brother's wife. He didn't count the daughter. Okay, for him it was a son that mattered. So the Bible must be right. I can't have a son, and that's because God is angry with me. The Pope said that the Bible's talking about sleeping with a brother's wife while the brother's still alive, not when the brother is dead. Now, in this case, I think we can find an answer in the Bible, and the Pope is correct. All right. The Bible does actually say that if the brother is dead, then not only can you marry your brother's wife, you should. You should marry her. It's your gimu to marry her. It's not just a case of Protestants disagreeing with Catholics, because Luther, who of course is a very famous Protestant reformer, Luther also disagreed with Henry about this. Luther agreed with the Pope in this case. So they're both kicked out of the Pope's church, but they don't agree with each other. All right? It's a long book. It was written over a long period of time, and understanding it is a very difficult matter. And Protestants themselves would often disagree about what it meant. Probably about half of the literature published at that time was arguing about what the Bible means. Book after book after book, thousands and thousands of books were published. This is the right way to understand this part of the Bible. Somebody, no, you've understood it wrong. If you look at this and this and this, and then you go back to the original, Hebrew or Greek, it means this. And they're publishing these books and they're arguing about it all across Europe.
So many Protestants would agree that before they were born, God had chosen some people to go to heaven, because that seems to be in the Bible. But does that also mean that God had chosen which people would go to hell? Some Protestants said yes, some Protestants said no. Okay? So Protestants wouldn't always agree with each other. And we still get those kinds of disagreements among Christians today. But today, the things that they're interested in are usually different. Today, they tend to be things like, well, abortion is a big one, isn't it? All right? Should you have an abortion? Okay? Catholics and Protestants, many of them, are against it. But some of them are for it. It's just a huge kind of moral argument. But a lot of people base their opinion on the Bible. So let's take something like Moses going to the top of the mountain. The story is that God gave him 10 basic laws, the 10 commandments. And one of them was, you shall not kill. Sometimes translated as, you shall not murder. You'll find a lot of disagreement among Christians today about what that means. If you kill someone during a war, they'll say, then that's not murder. If it's a criminal, we can put them to death. That's not murder. What is murder? What isn't murder? The Bible doesn't really give us a clear understanding. It just says, don't kill. Okay, you shall not kill. But it doesn't really help us very much when it comes to what do you do when it's a war? What do you do if somebody says, look, there's your baby, I'm going to kill your baby? You just say, oh, well, I mustn't kill you because it says so in the Bible, so you please go ahead and kill my baby. What are people supposed to do in these real, practical situations? Can they defend their family? Okay? Bible doesn't make it clear. Okay? If innocent children are killed by soldiers during a war, then isn't that murder, even if they're soldiers? Suppose you punish a criminal by putting him to death, and then later on you find, oh, he didn't do it. Who's guilty now? Okay, who's wrong now? We killed him, we thought he did it, but he didn't do it. Okay? Suppose a woman kills a man who's attacking her husband. A woman kills a man who's attacking her children, I mean. Does she have a right to do that? Does she have a right to protect her children against an attack by someone? So those are some of the questions that we might be asking today that are connected with the Bible. But in those days, they weren't asking those kinds of questions. They were asking different questions. They would be asking whether God had chosen people to go to heaven before they were born. We said predestination. And whether he'd chosen them to go to hell as well, which was called double predestination. So one of the reformers, John Calvin, he said God has decided not just who's going to go to heaven, but he's also decided who's going to go to hell. And other Protestants, as I say, they didn't agree with that. They thought that was too strict. And as I said, they argued about whether people would go to heaven by doing good things or whether they go to heaven by having faith in God. Justification by faith, justification by works. These are important words. These are kind of the semon tekina that you need to know in order to be able to understand this period. So please make sure you understand this vocabulary. And as I say, whether Christ's flesh and blood really were in the bread and wine in the Holy Communion. And those were the kinds of topics that people were interested in those days. Don't ask me why. They just were. I think it was probably atarimaya for them that if it's a war, well, you can protect yourself. Okay? We might be thinking about that now, but in those days it would be, of course you can protect yourself in a war. They didn't even stop to think about it. But these kinds of questions were important to them. Okay? Yeah, I think it's because they wanted to understand their place in this world, their existence in this world. In the Middle Ages, your life was just unimportant. Your life has one meaning. You're going to go to heaven when you die, you're going to go to heaven. That's all it was. That's the basic thing. So suddenly that starts changing, and people get worried. What should I do? What should I do to make sure I can go to heaven? All right? And these were the kinds of things that they were worried about. Why did the Reformation happen? There are lots of different reasons why it happened, but one of the basic things is, like I said, the Catholic Church had slowly been moving away from the Bible and developing its own traditions that were not to be found in the Bible. So it had grown up over hundreds of years, and new ideas had come in, new traditions had come in through what were called church councils, where the leaders of the church would get together and decide policy. So that by the 16th century, we got quite a lot of traditions that were practiced by the church, but were not in the Bible. And one of the practices that was very unpopular, and that, for example, Chaucer in the 14th century noticed, this is wrong, this is just a trick, was the idea of selling pardons and indulgences. So it's saying, you go to the priest, and I'm terribly sorry, I did this terrible thing, I was a very naughty boy, and the priest, not just the priest, but actual people who would go around the countryside, they would sell these pieces of paper. They say, if you buy this piece of paper from me, it's got an incant on it, it's got a little stamp that says that when you die, you won't have to spend 200 years in purgatory before you can go to heaven. You'll only have to spend 20 years there. Okay? So you're going to buy it. It's a good deal, it's a good offer. 180 years of suffering that you won't have to suffer after you're dead. Okay? People were going around the country selling these things, making a living. And of course, there's nothing at all in the Bible about anything like that. It's just a trick, really. And here's an image of that happening. Here's the pardoner selling. He might be selling these pieces of paper, but he also might be selling like a kind of omamori. Like this is the bone of St. Peter. This is really his bone. Well, it comes from a sheep, but he's selling it. Who wants to buy this bone of St. Peter? It will protect you when you're traveling. Okay, or this one will protect you. It is quite similar to the sort of omamori that you get in Japanese Shinto and in Buddhism as well. People go at New Year to get those kinds of things. Well, it's not in the Bible. Okay? There's nothing about having this will protect you, against, and this one will help you to pass your exams. There's nothing like that in the Bible about there's no value in the Bible given to any objects like that. So the Protestants were against it, and they saw it as a cheating economy. The church is trying to get money from people, and it's not fair because they're tricking people. His main purpose is to make the church rich. And people were getting angry because the church was so rich and so powerful. And even the king of the country wasn't really the king. The king couldn't do what he wanted. Look, Henry VIII couldn't marry who he wanted or divorce who he wanted because the church was so powerful. So Martin Luther, who was he was a monk, he was a Catholic at the beginning. He put his complaints onto the door of the church, and somehow that really caught people's imagination, and lots of people would say, yes, it's in the church, but it's not in the Bible. The church is doing things that are not in the Bible, and especially to get money. They're just trying to trick us. So here, he's not sure exactly that he did it like this, but that's the story, that he put these complaints on the door of the church. And then you've got other Protestant reformers, people like Melanchthon, Calvin, Zwingli. They're not going to be very important in our history, but we should notice that there are many reformers now, not just Luther, but others coming along and criticizing the church and trying to say what the true church should be. And so, as I say, they were disagreeing with the Catholics, but some, not always in the same direction. They were maybe having different ways of understanding. And then in England, basically, Henry was not a supporter of the reformers. Henry was true to the Catholics. Henry liked the Catholic way. So it's a kind of irony that, Henry left the church like that because he did not agree with the reformers. In 1521, the Pope gave a special kind of gohorbi to Henry and called him Fidei Defensor, defender of the faith. And then afterwards, from 1529 onwards, Henry was more and more against the Pope because of his marriage. We talked about that before. He wanted to end his marriage. And in the end, he decided to leave his wife, to divorce her, or more strictly speaking, annul the marriage. And then he was excommunicated. Excommunicated just means kicked out. It's a Latin word. It sounds kind of, Chiteki We use Latin when we want to sound clever, all right? The basic word is tobasareta, okay? He was kicked out by the Pope from the church. And so the Church of England basically continued to be mainly like a Catholic church in its teaching, in its structure. It continued just so it's like the Catholic Church has the Pope at the top. Henry takes away the Pope, but everything else stays the same. He allowed the Bible to be translated into English, and he closed the monasteries. Remember these two big things that Henry did. And this is the beginning of a process of swinging across. You can see it on your page there. I'll show you on the PowerPoint. Swinging across the 16th century from Catholic to Protestant, from Protestant to Catholic, and going backwards and forwards, all through the 16th century. Something like this. it starts off as a Catholic country, as it has been for 1,000 years or more, more or less 1,000 years. It hasn't been continuous because there have been invasions and things have changed, but for more than 1,000 years, it's basically followed the one church, the Catholic Church. And Henry followed that church himself. He was made Fidei Defensor, defender of the faith, by the Pope. He was given this special title by the Pope in 1521. And if you look at English money today, that's Queen Elizabeth, the Queen now. She is Elizabeth II Dei Gratia, thanks to God. Okay, God let her be Queen. And Regina, Queen, FD, Fidei Defensor, defender of the faith. It's kind of ironic because the Pope gave that title to Henry VIII for being a good Catholic. She is the head of the Episcopal Kyokai, which is not Catholic, but she's still using it, okay? They're still using that FD. So, yeah, Henry was considered a very good Catholic by the Pope. But then, later on in his life, he changed. He had the divorce or annulment of his marriage. He was excommunicated. He was kicked out of the church. He closed the monasteries, and he put the Bible into English. It didn't become like Protestant, but it wasn't Catholic anymore. Not in the Roman Catholic basic idea. These things were different from the Catholic Church. So it ends up somewhere a little bit in the middle. And it's this kind of middle church, not fully Catholic, not fully Protestant, that starts to grow up at that time. And then Henry dies, and his son becomes the king. Now, his son is just a boy, and he dies young. But the people who are looking after him are strongly Protestant. So at this time, England becomes much more clearly a Protestant country, following European Protestant teaching. So the church moves over into that Protestant direction. But Edward was not a strong boy, and he died before he was 20. So, goodbye, Edward, and hello, Mary. Mary was the daughter. Remember, Henry wanted a son. He had a daughter from his first wife. She now became the queen. And she was Catholic, like her mother, completely Catholic. So, for 6 years, the church went back to being Catholic, because Mary was Catholic, and she went back to the Catholic ways. So, we've got a completely Catholic church. Then she also dies, and her sister her half-sister from the second marriage, Elizabeth, who is more Protestant, she takes over, and she is queen for a long time, for nearly 50 years, 45 years. And she establishes this kind of middle way, via media in Latin, the middle way. All right, a church that's not completely Protestant and it's not completely Catholic, and it ends up looking a little bit like this. Okay, because she allows, just as her father had allowed, some difference inside the church. Some churches were more traditional, some churches were more reformist, more Protestant. So the same thing happens. And even today, you can go to
Eikoko Kyokai, Church of England, in England. You can go into one church and you can hold the Senko, the incense. You see a little font for baptizing. It's very Catholic. It looks very Catholic. Okay, the decorations all look very Catholic. We call that High Anglican. Okay, high meaning closer to the Catholic Church. And then you can go into other Anglican, Eikoko Kyokai, Church of England churches, and it's very simple. It almost looks like this classroom, right? There might be one simple wooden cross somewhere. It's very simple, and that's low church. It's closer to European Protestantism, low church Anglicanism. So that's also a part of the Eikoko Kyokai. There's quite a big difference between one church and another one. Okay, some of them are almost Catholic, very close, and some of them are quite strongly Protestant. So you get a kind of spread. So to sum up then, it's Catholic, it's kind of somewhere in the middle, it's Protestant, it's back to being Catholic, and it ends up somewhere in a sort of Protestantish direction. All right? And that's going on all through the 16th century. All right? Okay? That's what we end up with. So it must have been very confusing for people. No wonder they were worrying in that age, because if it's wrong, we're all going to go to hell. And if it's right, the Protestant church, if Elizabeth is right, I can go to heaven, but my mother and father will be in hell because they followed the wrong teaching of the wrong church. It's a very difficult time for people, because of course they wanted to believe that they would die and they would meet their family in heaven. But this meant that, well, no. If they followed the wrong church, then they can't go to heaven. And so it was a really psychologically difficult time for people to live. And this, of course, is the time Shakespeare was born in Hitogo Roshi, 1564. And so he grew up all the time under this Elizabethan settlement. That's what he knew. And he, of course, was very interested in all these questions about, well, what's the true church? And are we taking the right direction here? So we can find a lot of that in his work. And we'll try to take a look at little bits of that. Are we okay with this? Yeah? Okay, let's move on. Basically, once Elizabeth became queen and she made this religious settlement, it's called the settlement, she decided the shape of the church, the structure of the church, things became stable. And so from that time onwards, until Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century, the church kept that sort of middle position. We'll be talking about Oliver Cromwell later on, okay, in the second half of the term. And basically that is the church that we still have today. That kind of not completely Protestant and not completely Catholic kind of church. And when I was a boy, they taught Henry VIII English Reformation. But as you can see, it wasn't so simple. It was happening over a long period of time. And I'm just showing the 16th century. We've got big changes in the 17th century. We've got some changes in the 18th century. Really, the development of this church that we have today took 200 or 300 years. It didn't just suddenly happen with Henry VIII. So people now talk about the long Reformation, something that happened
slowly with different changes going on at different times. And yeah, in the last 20 years or maybe 30 years, the fashion is, or not just the fashion, but it's closer to the true history, I think, to say that the Reformation was not something that suddenly happened. It's something that happened slowly. And that even though Luther was in the 16th century and this split of Catholics and Protestants, where Catholics are going one direction and Protestants are going another direction, this is all happening in the 16th century. We can see things back in the 14th century, the beginnings of dissatisfaction, and even earlier, perhaps, we can see groups of people who are saying, no, the church is going in the wrong direction. And it continues, this kind of debate continues, and it's having an influence maybe even today, because if the Catholics were going in this direction, all right, so that's the Catholics were going in a different direction. Once the Protestants started coming into this direction, they start talking to each other. And they start thinking, oh yeah, bloody saw this, They start, and they say, well, we were a little bit kibbish. So they're influenced by each other. They're in a continuing kind of dialogue and debate that continues even today, all right, over questions like abortion and women's position of women and all sorts of things like that. That kind of debate is continuing today. For example, if you are a Catholic and you go to the priest today and you say, I was a naughty boy, I slept with another woman, or I did something naughty, the priest won't say, take out a whip and beat yourself with it. Okay? That doesn't happen. Okay? They've changed. They also won't say, well, I can send you this lovely piece of paper that means that you won't get to heaven more quickly. They won't say that. Okay? So they also changed. And that's called the Counter-Reformation. If you're interested in this history of this period, you've got the Protestant Reformation, you've got the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Okay? So the Catholics also had a Reformation, a Counter-Reformation. They reformed without saying goodbye to the Pope. Protestant reform meant we say goodbye to the Pope and we make our own church. The Catholics reformed inside the structure of their own church. So obviously it's not the same church that Luther was angry with hundreds of years ago. So what we need to think about, students of English history, is that there's this paradigm. A paradigm is like an image or a model of the English being unhappy under Mary. This is when I was at school and when I was at university. Henry had made a Protestant country. His daughter Mary changed it back to the Catholic way, and the English people were very unhappy. They hated her. She was cruel, Ijiwaru. She burned Protestants, which she did. Okay, but they all hated her because they had now become Protestant, and she was forcing them to be Catholic. That's what I learned when I was at school. Okay, but I think it's mostly wrong. I think most English people at this time were happy to be back inside the Catholic Church. They thought, oh, okay, there's sort of feeling carrying on with the old tradition. And I don't think it's true that England had become a Protestant country and that everybody hated Mary. So that model, that understanding, that paradigm is, I think, wrong. And that paradigm has been deconstructed, it's been broken down, people have challenged that way of thinking, and that's not the way most historians would want to look at it today.
There was plenty of resistance to Protestantism in England, going all through this period. We'll see some big examples as we continue on the course. The Elizabethan settlement was not the end of Catholicism, it was the beginning of a long, slow struggle between Catholics and Protestants. Okay?
I used to finish around about here, but we have 100-minute classes now, so I'm going to carry on a little bit longer. Yeah, so it's important to notice that we are studying this, and the history or the understanding of history, the thinking about history is changing while we're here, studying it. Okay, people are more and more thinking it's not just Protestanto no eikoku kyokai katta Catholicu kyokai maketa. It's not as simple as that. It's much more complicated. And Catholic literature and culture continue to be very important in Elizabethan England, even if the church has now become a kind of Protestant church. Okay?